Okay, let's unpack this. That monitor you're staring at right now, your window to the digital world, well, it might actually be lying to you about color.
Yeah, it's a surprising thought, isn't it? What you see isn't always what you get, digitally speaking.
Exactly. And that's really what we're diving into today, how to get genuinely accurate color on your screen. It's non-negotiable if you work with images seriously.
Mm.
And the sources you pull together, they give a really solid look at what actually makes a display truly suitable for, accurate color stuff.
It is interesting how often this just gets missed. People generally assume, and you can't blame them, that a screen just shows the right colors out of the box.
Mm-hmm.
But like our sources really hammer home, there's this huge gap between a regular display and one truly built for critical color.
Totally. And that difference really matters.
It really does. It has real consequences for visual work.
Yeah, it's so easy to get caught up in like screen size or resolution. But if color accuracy is what you need, those things really take a back seat. So, okay, our mission here is to sort of demystify the tech side of things. Equip you with what you need to know to spot the key differences.
Right.
We'll get into why it matters for your work and what specific things to look for if you're thinking about a monitor that tells the truth about color. We're going to break down things like calibration, profiling, panel types, all that important stuff, but hopefully without making your head spin.
And a really vital place to start, something that causes a lot of confusion, is nailing down the difference between calibration and profiling.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. People use them interchangeably all the time.
They do.
Yeah.
And the sources highlight just how much mix-up that causes.
Okay, so let's clear that up. Calibration, right? The sources explain it as getting your monitor to its best possible sort of native state, using its own built-in hardware controls.
Yeah, like tuning an instrument. That's a good way to put it. Getting it to its inherent best.
So it's a foundation.
Exactly. Calibration sets that foundation. A classic example is setting the brightness to a specific target, maybe like 120 candelas. That's often recommended because it simulates pretty closely, actually, how bright a piece of paper looks under normal room light.
Right, so your screen preview looks more like the final print will.
Precisely. You're bridging that gap.
And the amount of control you actually have, that really varies depending on the monitor tech, doesn't it? Like old CRTs versus modern LCDs.
Oh, definitely. With the old tube monitors, the CRTs, you often had, loads controls, brightness, contrast, even individual red, green, and blue gain knobs.
But then you look at, say, cheaper LCDs. Our sources point out they often only have one real hardware control.
That's usually just the brightness, yeah.
Yeah.
Any other adjustments like color sliders you might see in some software, those are typically happening in the graphics card, not the monitor itself.
Uh-huh.
So the advice is usually set the brightness right, and then, well, probably leave the other software stuff alone at default.
But then you get to the higher-end LCDs, the Eizos and similar ones, and this is where it gets interesting.
Right.
They often do have true hardware controls for brightness and those RGB gains, kind of like the old CRTs.
And crucially, they often have much more sophisticated internal processing. We're talking 10-bit, 14-bit, sometimes even 16-bit processing internally.
Which is a huge jump from the standard 8-bit in a computer's video card, right?
Right.
Way more precision.
A massive jump.
Mm-hmm.
And that higher bit depth in the monitor's own processing during calibration is, well, it's absolutely key. We'll probably talk more about why later.
Okay.
It basically allows for much finer adjustments and helps stop things like color banding and smooth gradients.
Gotcha.
Oh, and the sources also make a really important point about connections. For LCDs, always go digital DVI, HDMI, DisplayPort.
Not analog VGA.
Right. Analog can soften the image slightly and mess with color accuracy. Digital keeps it sharp and clean.
Okay, so calibration, getting the monitor itself tuned up. What about profiling then? What's that step?
Profiling comes after calibration. It's about measuring what colors the monitor is actually showing, and then correcting for any leftover inaccuracies by tweaking the signal that gets sent to the monitor.
So it's like a correction layer on top.
Exactly. Think of it like making custom glasses for your already well-tuned instrument.
The sources had that red 50 example, which I thought was pretty clear.
Yeah, that's a good one. If you tell the computer, show red 50, but the measuring device sees the monitor is actually showing, say, red 55.
A slightly different shade.
Right. The profiling software figures this out. And then it might tell the system, okay, aim for red 45 next time, so that what actually appears on that specific screen is the red 50 you wanted.
Clever.
It does this across a whole range of colors, building up this detailed map or profile of how your monitor behaves.
The lookup table. essentially.
Pretty much. A lookup table that lives in your operating system, and the OS uses that map to adjust the signals going out, ensuring what you see is much closer to the intended color.
And the really crucial thing here, which the sources stress, is that profiling works best after good calibration.
Absolutely. You calibrate first to get the monitor working optimally on its own.
Right.
Then you profile to correct the remaining subtle errors. Trying to profile a badly calibrated monitor forces the software to make huge, crude corrections.
Which can mess up the image quality, introduce artifacts.
Exactly. It degrades the image. Like trying to align a car with flat tires, you got to inflate them first.
Makes perfect sense. Okay, so that clarifies calibration versus profiling. Now, what about the different ways to actually do this monitor color management? The sources lay out 4 main methods.
They do, each with its own pros and cons.
Let's walk through them. Top of the list, the gold standard, is direct hardware calibration. What makes that the best?
Well, what's really effective there is that it taps directly into those high bit depth lookup tables we just mentioned.
The ones inside the high-end monitors.
Exactly. Inside monitors like the Eizo Color Edge series, some NEC SpectraView models, special software talks directly to the monitor's internal brain, essentially, to make the adjustments.
So the corrections aren't happening in the potentially cruder 8-bit space of the video card?
Precisely.
They're happening inside the monitor's own refined 10, 12, 14, even 16-bit engine. That sounds way smoother.
It results in significantly smoother color transitions, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially in tricky areas like subtle gradients or deep shadows, you just have so many more levels to play with, which basically eliminates that nasty color banding issue.
Okay.
And our sources are clear. This direct hardware approach gives the most precise and stable calibration you can get.
Right. So that's the top tier. Next method, software calibration, but using a hardware measuring device. This sounds like the practical choice for a lot of folks.
Yeah, I think for most serious users who have a decent, but maybe not top-tier ISO-level monitor, this is the sweet spot. You use a hardware device, like a colorimeter, maybe a Spider, or an X-Rite is a common brand. That device physically reads the colors off your screen. Then the software that comes with it creates that correction map, that profile.
Lookup table we talked about.
Exactly. And that table gets loaded into your computer's video card.
So the signal leaving the computer gets adjusted on the fly to compensate for your monitor's specific quirks.
Correct. It's obviously more affordable than buying a full hardware calibration monitor, but it's a massive step up from relying just on software or your eyes.
And the sources really emphasize if you're serious about images, getting one of these devices is a good investment. Saves time, saves hassle with bad prints.
Absolutely. It pays for itself pretty quickly and saves frustration and materials, potentially.
Okay, method 3. Purely software calibration. Using the tools built into Windows or Mac OS. How good are those, really?
Well, the consensus seems to be they're definitely better than doing nothing at all.
Better than zero?
Right. Windows has its color management wizard. Mac has the color sync utility. They step you through visually adjusting things on screen.
By eye.
Yeah, entirely by eye. Some graphics cards also bundle their own software calibration tools.
But the big drawback is
the lack of objective measurement. It's all down to your perception on that day, under your specific room lighting with your eyes.
Which isn't very scientific.
Not at all. It's subjective. So while it's maybe a first step if the budget is super tight, it just won't give you the accuracy or the consistency of using a hardware measuring device.
And that brings us to the last method. Calibration by eye. Sometimes called the Shirley system. Sounds basic.
That's putting it mildly. Yeah, calibration purely by eye, especially the idea of trying to match your screen to a physical print held next to it. That's the Shirley system thing.
Yeah.
Our sources basically say, this is the absolute bare minimum, and honestly, don't do it for serious work.
Why is it so bad?
Well, it's fundamentally flawed, isn't it? It relies on your subjective eyesight, which just isn't precise enough. Plus, the basic brightness contrast controls on most monitors are way too coarse for fine adjustments.
And matching to a print introduces even more variables, like the lighting on the print.
Exactly. It's just not reliable. The core message here is, accurate color is science. It needs objective measurement, objective standards. Guessing by eye just doesn't cut it.
Right. Science, not guesswork. Okay, so we've covered the how of managing color. Let's shift to the screens themselves. Panel types. Which ones matter most for imaging?
Well, the main players for imaging work are really IPS-PLS panels and PVA panels. Generally speaking, IPS and the very similar PLS tech from Samsung is often seen as the best overall choice for critical color work.
Why is that?
They tend to offer better color reproduction accuracy, and crucially, They hold on to that color accuracy even when you view the screen from wider angle.
The viewing angle stability.
Exactly. And you mentioned earlier they often have slightly lower native contrast ratios.
Which sounds bad, but is actually good for simulating paper.
Correct. Paper isn't super high contrast, maybe around 200.1 contrast, so a monitor closer to that can give a more realistic print preview. IPS panels are also known for smoother gradients, less banding.
But not all IPS panels are created equal, right?
Definitely not. IPS is a broad category. You still need to look for quality within that type.
Okay, what about PVA panels? Sources said they've gotten much better recently.
They really have improved a lot. If you're sitting directly in front of the screen, a good quality PVA panel today can give you color accuracy that's very comparable to many IPS panels.
What are their strengths, then?
They often have higher brightness capabilities, achieve deeper black levels, so higher contrast overall, and sometimes faster refresh rates.
So maybe better for video work or gaming alongside photo editing?
Potentially, yes. The
Yeah.
faster response can be good for motion, but potential downside is they might show a bit more brightness variation across the screen sometimes compared to the best IPS panels. Viewing angles might not be quite as wide either.
So, bottom line, for mainly still image work, critical color, IPS PLS is probably the safer bet if budget allows. Better viewing angles, maybe smoother gradients.
That's generally the recommendation, yeah. Especially if you collaborate, have people looking over your shoulder. But if video is a big part of your mix, a good PVA could be a strong contender.
And then there's TN panels?
Ah, TN. Yeah. The sources are pretty unanimous here. Just avoid them for imaging.
Why?
Their viewing angles are very poor. Colors shift dramatically if you're not dead center, and their color accuracy is just inherently limited. Fine for basic office work or maybe some gaming, but definitely not for color-critical tasks.
Okay, got it. Avoid TN. So we know about calibration, profiling, panel types. Now let's dig into the specific features that really make a monitor great for imaging. Our sources have a prioritized list, starting with the most important one.
Right. And that top feature, the absolute foundation, according to these experts, is high bit depth panel electronics.
We touched on this, the 10, 12, 14, 16-bit internal processing versus the standard 6 or 8-bit in consumer monitors.
Exactly. That standard 8-bit gives you only 256 distinct levels per color channel. When you calibrate a monitor like that, you're essentially throwing away some of those levels to make corrections.
Which leads to?
Banding, visible steps and smooth gradients because you just don't have enough intermediate tones left.
But with the higher bit depth electronics in Pro monitors...
You have thousands, even tens of thousands,
Yep.
of internal levels per channel to work with. So when the calibration makes adjustments, it can do so with incredible finesse.
No visible steps, just smooth transitions.
Precisely. It allows the monitor to accurately reproduce subtle tones, especially in shadows and highlights, without compression or artifacts. It's absolutely key for simulating print accurately.
Yeah.
You just don't find this level of processing in regular consumer displays.
Makes sense why it's number one. Okay, number two is direct hardware calibration support. We talked about the method. Why is it important as a feature?
Well, it means the monitor is designed to work with that superior method. It allows those calibration adjustments to be written directly into the monitor's own high bit depth lookup tables we just discussed. This preserves the maximum image quality, and it often makes calibrating much quicker and easier. The software talks straight to the monitor's hardware, often bypassing the need for you to fiddle much with the on-screen buttons.
It's like having a dedicated, high-precision color engine built right in.
That's a great way to think about it, yeah.
Okay, next up. The general accuracy of the display straight from the factory.
This is a big one, too. High-end imaging monitors from brands like, again, BenQ's Pro lines, Eizo CG, NEC SpectraView. They're typically factory calibrated to incredibly tight tolerances before they even ship.
So they're already pretty good out of the box.
Way better than average, yeah. They often meet strict industry standards like UGRA or FOGO-JA. It gives you a much more reliable starting point even before you do your own calibration.
Good point. Then extensive calibration controls. What should we look for here?
You need flexibility. Primarily, a really wide brightness adjustment range, ideally from something low, like maybe 60 candelas, up to 200 or more,
Why so low?
for accurately simulating print under dimmer viewing conditions. Many consumer monitors just can't get dim enough without messing up the color. You also need precise controls for gamma, the tonal response curve, and the white point, the color temperature. But, and this is key, these controls are only truly effective if the monitor also has that high bit depth internal processing we keep mentioning. Otherwise, you're making crude adjustments.
Got it. High bit depth input is also on the list. How does that help? accepting a 10-bit signal.
Right. If your graphics card can output a 10-bit signal and your monitor can accept it, you're sending over 1,000 levels of information per color channel instead of just 256 with standard 8-bit.
More data in means potentially smoother output.
Exactly. It just provides a more robust pipeline for color information, leading to smoother gradients and potentially more accurate color overall.
Okay. Now, true contrast control. This was interesting, the idea that super high contrast isn't always good for print simulation.
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive, but paper itself is relatively low contrast, right? Maybe 200.1 or so.
Mm.
Many LCDs boast contrast ratios of 1000.1 or much higher.
Which makes images look punchy on screen, but not like the print.
Exactly. So high-end imaging monitors often let you specifically adjust the black point and the white point to lower the contrast ratio to match paper more accurately.
That seems critical for proofing.
It's vital for getting a reliable screen-to-print match, yeah. Otherwise, you might overcorrect contrast in your edits.
Uniformity systems, what are these and why do they matter?
Okay, so LCD panels aren't perfectly even. They can have slight variations in brightness and color from one part of the screen to another.
Like the corners might be dimmer or slightly different color?
Could be, yeah. Uniformity correction systems found in most pro-grade NECs, Eizo CGs, BenQ P series, tackle this. During manufacturing, they measure many points across the panel and apply zone-specific corrections to even things out.
So the whole screen looks consistent.
As close as possible, yes. Which is super important when you're editing, especially large images. You don't want one area looking different just because of the panel lottery.
Right. Makes sense. Matte screen surface, this seems like a no-brainer.
Absolutely essential. Glossy screens look slick in the store, but for real work, they're terrible. Reflections everywhere, messing with your perception of contrast and color.
So you need that non-reflective matte finish.
Definitely. High-quality monitors use good matte coatings, some even fancy anti-reflective layers, to minimize glare and give you an accurate view.
Wide gamut support. We hear this term a lot. Why is it important?
So gamut is the range of colors a device can display. Standard monitors cover a space called sRGB, which is fine for most web stuff. Wide gamut monitors can display a much larger range of colors, often getting close to or covering the Adobe RGB space.
And we need that
Because modern cameras capture incredibly rich colors, and high-end printers can reproduce more saturated colors than sRGB allows. So to accurately see and edit those really vibrant greens, cyans, reds, you need a monitor that can actually display them.
So important for photographers dealing with rich colors or certain print workflows.
Increasingly so, yeah, as the whole imaging chain gets better.
Resolution comes lower on the list than I might have guessed.
Yeah, I mean, high resolution is nice, right? Sharp text, more detail visible. But for the core task of color accuracy, it's less critical than things like bit depth calibration and uniformity.
You could have a super sharp screen showing the wrong colors.
Exactly. Color fidelity comes first for imaging work. A 4K screen that's inaccurate is worse than a lower res screen that's perfectly calibrated.
Gotcha. And then there are things like good on-screen menus, warranty, support, screen size, pivot, the practicalities.
Right, they all add up. Good menus matter if you don't have that easy hardware calibration. Longer warranties, like 3 to 5 years on many Pro Eizo and BenQ models versus 1 year typical consumer that's real value and peace of mind.
And pivot support can be handy for portrait shots.
Definitely useful. Screen size, yeah, bigger is often nicer, but don't sacrifice quality for size if the budget is tight. A smaller, high-quality screen beats a big, low-quality one for color work.
Okay, so wrapping up the features. If listeners are thinking, okay, I need one of these, what specific series do the sources point to as reliable choices?
Well, for the absolute top end, the best of the best, where accuracy and ease of use are paramount, the Eizo ColorEdge series, particularly the CG models, consistently comes up. They often have those built-in sensors for fully automatic hardware calibration. Super easy, super accurate long-term. The CG 2700X gets mentioned as a possible benchmark.
Pricey, I imagine. What about something still excellent, but maybe a bit more accessible?
The BenQ SW series gets a lot of praise there. Models like the SW3-M1C offer, really good screen size and very solid color accuracy at a more moderate price point compared to the top ISOs. A great balance of performance and value.
Okay, BenQ SW. And is there a good middle ground, maybe from Eizo, but not the absolute top tier?
Yeah, the Eizo CS series is positioned there, often seen as a great choice, especially for still image work. Something like the CS2740 gives you a lot of that Eizo quality and color accuracy, but maybe without all the bells and whistles of the CG series, making it more affordable. still a serious professional tool.
Great suggestions. Okay, this has been super helpful. So just to quickly recap the big takeaways for you listening. First, there's a massive crucial difference between your average monitor and one truly built for imaging.
Huge difference.
Second, understanding calibration, tuning the monitor itself versus profiling, correcting the signal is fundamental.
Right.
And third, when looking for a monitor, prioritize things like high bit depth electronics and direct hardware calibration support. Those are really key for accurate, consistent results.
Absolutely. And connecting it back to you, the listener, think of investing in a color-accurate monitor, not just as buying hardware, but as investing in the quality and reliability of your actual work. Seeing true colors means making better decisions, which means more predictable, more successful outcomes, whether that's print or digital.
Yeah, totally. And maybe a final thought to leave you with. Think about all the time and effort you pour into capturing or creating your images. Are you really seeing what you captured? Are you seeing its full potential on your current screen?
Or is that screen potentially misleading you, subtly distorting the very colors you're trying to perfect?
It's definitely something worth reflecting on, right? How much impact your display might be having on your whole creative process.
It really is. So maybe, dig back into some of these resources, look into those recommended monitor series a bit more based on what you need and what your budget looks like. Getting a handle on this stuff, the fundamentals of color accurate displays, it can truly make a world of difference to your work.